I'd like to call the special bid board meeting of August 12th, 2019 to order. We do have a quorum. First item is to introduce our new Historic Theater Executive Director, Jeff Potts. If you want to go up and say a few words, or you can go by the podium there, and Patrick will put you on television. And
Excellent. Well, good evening. Thank you for having me today. As Mike said, my name's Jeff Potts. I'm the new executive director for the Historic West Bend Theater in downtown West Bend. I've been on the job, about a month, and I currently live in Oshkosh, and I'm looking to relocate to West Bend as soon as possible to get fully involved in downtown and the rest of the community. So I'm excited to be here and excited to be part of this conversation about leveraging our historic assets in our community. Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Now what the real meeting was about was to talk about turning the downtown district into a historic district. Do we have a PowerPoint, or is that all up and running?
I got a 1 sec.
There we go. Welcome. Thanks for coming back.
Yep. Thanks for having me so much. Should I go from here, or did you have more of an introduction?
Nope. I don't have anything else. It's
All
all
right.
yours.
Okay, thank you. So, hello, I am Dyna Pink, and I'm the State Historic Preservation Officer. I'm located at the Wisconsin Historical Society with the State Historic Preservation Office, and it is Wisconsin's Historic Preservation Office. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is about historic districts, what they are, what it means, and sort of next steps if the community decides to go forward. So first of all, when you have a historic district and a listed property, it's kind of like, well, what does that mean? Well, this is the official definition of what is the National Register of Historic Places. And so if you can see on the screen, what the National Register is really an official federal list of different types of properties, including historic districts, sites, buildings, structures, and objects that are important for a particular reason. And so most common are really something that's related to history or an example of an architectural style. The other important thing about the National Register is that, so you have to be a certain type of property, you have to be important for a reason, but that importance can be anywhere from the local level to the national level. And most properties are eligible at the local level of significance, and that means that they are important within the context of their communities. So some things are obvious, when you tell people, our state capitol. Obviously a very important building listed in the National Register of Historic Places. That's kind of clear to everybody why this would be. But we look at other types of properties that are listed, and so I just have a couple of examples. We have farmsteads that are listed. This is in the town of Union in Rock County. You can see buildings built from 1865 to 1950. A fine example of actually a mail order house from the George Barber catalog. But the other thing too, this property is also important for the history of agriculture because a strain of cattle that is still raised in Wisconsin was bred here originally. We also have educational buildings that are listed. This is Peckham Junior High School in Milwaukee, which opened in 1927. This is important in the history of education because it was one of the very first junior high schools in the city of Milwaukee, and it's part of the whole junior high school movement as something that was a trend in education. So moving from kind of the primary school to the high school, of creating a school that was in between to help kids get ready for high schools. We also have a number of listed shipwrecks in the state of Wisconsin. We have 700 known shipwrecks in our waters. We know where about over 200 of them are. Our office actually has 3 maritime archaeologists on staff who go and explore these shipwrecks and prepare the nominations for listing them. And so here's one just off of Manitowoc County in Lake Michigan, the Gallinipper. Archaeological sites or Native American mounds. This is the Man Mound. outside of Baraboo in Sauk County. You can see in the drawing how big the man mound actually is. It's really hard to tell. The part that is extant is about the size of a football field. It's the largest known anthropomorphic figure in the United States. And that is here in Wisconsin. So those are all examples of properties that are listed in the National Register of Historic Places, but we're here specifically to talk about historic districts. It's a little bit different from those individual listings that we just saw. And what a district is that it's a collection. It's a collection of resources that are of a similar age, a similar use, and that you can see here the official definition again. It's something that has a concentration, linkage, or continuity of sites, buildings, structures, or objects which are united by their history, their plan, physical development, or aesthetics. And these are things like downtown districts, residential, neighborhoods, rural villages, large parks, large archaeological sites. So what would make a district eligible? We saw some of those individual examples. They have very unique histories to themselves. There are 4 primary criteria. There are 4 criteria for listing in the National Register, and they are architectural importance, historical importance, association with important individuals, or the ability to yield information, which is typically archaeology. And these are just 2 different examples, a district in Delavan and one in downtown Baraboo. So one that's relatively close by to here that was just recently listed about the size of yours is the Downtown Plymouth Historic District, which was listed in 2016. And I don't know if you can see very clearly here on the scale that you're seeing. Which one can you all see the best? So you have the boundaries, and then you have some of these buildings that are shaded. And so the shaded buildings are considered non-contributing in that district. When we look at every district, we look at the concentration of resources that are going to be designated, and then within that concentration, there are buildings that are either contributing or non-contributing to the district. And non-contributing means that they're either too new, they fall outside of that period of importance of the downtown, or something that's of recent construction, or something that's been so significantly changed over time that it no longer resembles the building during the historic period. So here is the boundary of the potential West Bend Downtown Historic District. It's actually a good-sized district for a community of this size. You can see that it runs for several blocks. We haven't made a determination yet of what's contributing or non-contributing. That would be done as part of the process of really looking at the history of the buildings and what would fall within that category. But it basically encompasses the core, the most intact core of commercial buildings in downtown West Bend. So what's in it for people? Why do communities pursue? Why do individuals pursue? Property owners pursue? We'll kind of start at the bottom because we're going to talk a little bit more about tax credits. A lot of communities use it for tourism and economic development. Come visit our historic downtown. Come visit our downtown that's listed in the National Register. It's a way of fostering community identity and pride. You get a report about your community in the nomination itself. It's something people can rally around. Something gives people the history to talk about the development of their downtown. And then for individual property owners, there is that ability to apply for state and federal tax credits for approved rehabilitation work, and that's what's happening at the West Bend Theater. So they are using tax credits to help offset some of the expenses of the rehabilitation. And there is a 20% federal tax credit, and there is also a 20% state tax credit up to a $3.5 million credit. That means a $17 million project. I don't think you would have a project that would exceed that amount in downtown West Bend. That's a really big project, $17 million. So there is the potential to use both of those credits for a property owner to get essentially 40% of the cost of their approved rehabilitation work as a credit. Other thing people ask about, so what about the National Register and private property rights? I know that's a concern that comes up. It does not limit what a private property owner can do if they're using their own funds, that they're not applying for tax credits. We would not see that project. We would not review that project. So we do review actions of government, but not of private property owners, of things that they're doing with their own money. However, if you were to apply for a federal or state grant or license or permit, then the property would come into our office. If someone were to pull a demolition permit, actually the municipality needs to hold the permit for 30 days and notify our office. It gives us an opportunity to photograph the building prior to demolition. We can't prevent the demolition. It simply gives us an opportunity to record it. And under state statutes, you can also not use abrasive cleaning of the exterior. I don't know if that's ever been pursued as something against a property owner, but it's not a good thing to do on a masonry building. So getting back to the tax credits, because that's what most people are interested in, and actually I have a little handout which I'll pass out. So to take advantage of the tax credits, a property has to be listed in the National Register of Historic Places to use the state and the federal tax credit, or be in the process of listing when they start the process. For the federal credit, there's a minimum project cost of $5,000 or the adjusted basis value. A lot of these numbers haven't changed since the beginning of the program. For most people, it's meeting that adjusted basis value that you have to meet for the minimum cost of the project. For the state credit, there is actually a minimum of a $50,000 qualifying expense for your credit. The nice thing about the state credit is that in Wisconsin, we are able to decouple our federal and our state credits, and we're seeing a lot of small projects in smaller downtowns using the state-only tax credit, so people are getting a 20% credit for a store front rehabilitation because they're meeting that $50,000 minimum. The credit can only be used for the actual rehabilitation work, not for new construction. So if you were to put an addition on, the addition is not covered, but the work on your building is. And then there is a 5-year recapture. It's a prorated recapture, so if you were to sell your building or something, you were to significantly alter it, that it no longer met the criteria, there is the opportunity for the Treasury to recapture a portion of your credit. And then something that changed with the tax reform is that the credit must now be claimed over 5 years. People used to be able to claim all of their credit up front, but now you have to take it prorated over the 5 years at 20% per year. And that's both for the state and the federal. So how did things come into us? There are 3 parts to the tax credits. So those of you who have businesses downtown happen to own a historic building if you were interested in pursuing something of this sort. The Part 1 confirms that you actually have a historic building. These are all forms, and they're just called Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. It's either that you're listed or that you're in a contributing building to a historic district. So the first part is just, do you have a historic building? The second part is you describe what your project is, and this is the part where you have to actually tell what you're going to do with your building, and that part is reviewed both by our office and by the National Park Service, and then they approve your Part 2. You can't start the work until you get the approve for the state credit. In Wisconsin, our state credit is issued The contract for it is issued by the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation. We reviewed the projects. The WEDC actually signs the contract with the person doing the project. So part one, you have a historic building. Part two, here's what I'm going to do. You do your project, and then you submit the part three, which is basically you prove that you did what you said you were going to do and you met all of the conditions that were put forward by the project, and then you can claim the credit on your state and federal taxes. So who decides? I know these are a little bit out of order, but I think there were some things here that I really wanted to make sure to talk to you about. Who makes these decisions, and sort of what are these different things? People hear historic district, local landmark, National Register, National Landmark, like what are all of these things? And so in a lot of communities, there are also local historic preservation commission and local historic preservation ordinances that can designate local landmarks. Those are very different from what we do. So under state and federal, there's the state and federal on the left, local designation on the right. We administer at the Wisconsin Historical Society, we administer the state and the National Register in the state of Wisconsin. We review things under state and federal law. We review state and federal actions, not those of private property owners. We also review, that is missing, we also review local unit of government impacts. It's primarily honorific for private property owners, and it qualifies you for tax credits. For those communities that have local landmark designation, that's something that it's administered by the local unit of government through their local ordinance. It's under their zoning ordinance, and they review things that require permits. They have a review authority, and they help to protect the property values. So I do not believe that do you have a local landmark ordinance? You do not. So what are the next steps? If there's some interest in pursuing National Register nomination in the community, the first thing that we like to do is to have an informational meeting for all of the property owners in the district, not the business owners, but the property owners, because we want to know that there's going to be support for the nomination moving forward. There's nothing worse than going through the whole process and finding out that there is objection at the very end. So if there's good support, a consultant would be hired to prepare the nomination, so to prepare all of the documentation. That is completed. It gets submitted to our office. We review it and schedule it for a quarterly board meeting. Our state review board reviews all of our state nominations. And at the same time, we have another informational meeting for property owners to answer questions. After it goes to the board, with their approval, it's listed in the state register. We send it to the National Park Service for listing in the National Register. And so then the property is listed in both the state and National Register. So the decision here is there support to do this? And then would there be support from the property owners in the district? Because what happens is that at the time of listing, every property owner receives notification that the property is coming up at the State Review Board meeting and that the nomination will be considered. And every property owner is given the opportunity to object. The National Register and the State Register program work by active objection. There's not a vote, not a yes or no vote. It's active objection. And so if someone objects, they need to submit a notarized form that they are an owner and they object. And if a majority of property owners object, then the district is not listed. It's not those who are in, those who are out. A district is everybody or nobody. So that's why we really want to know that there will be support, because the nomination is, first of all, not an inexpensive undertaking, and it's quite a bit of work also in the processing. So we really want to make sure that as these projects move forward, that there will be support in the community among the property owners, and that we will not reach the objection process. Also, if people object and the district is not listed, it also means you can't take advantage of the tax credit program. So the National Register is nothing new in Wisconsin. We have 43 National Historic Landmarks. Those are the most important properties in the country. So I just came here from a meeting in Milwaukee about the National Soldiers Home, which is one of our national historic landmarks. It's those big buildings near Miller Park, the oldest extant collection of buildings related to our Veterans Administration are here in Milwaukee. But just overall, we have 2,100 individual listings in the National Register, and there are over 400 historic districts listed in Wisconsin, and 6 of them are here in Washington County. And they are, I just threw some numbers up there, they can be very small. So in De Pere, the Main Avenue Historic District has 18 buildings. In Milwaukee, Walker's Point Historic District has 502. You're sort of there in the kind of in the lower middle. So it's not an unusual type of district. We have a lot of downtown historic districts. A lot of communities have gone through this process. So that is what I have for our presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. And I know, did you share the PowerPoint? I had sent an earlier PowerPoint too. I don't know, we can share this as well. So.
Anybody have questions?
You had mentioned it's not a inexpensive endeavor. What are the costs for the community in something
So
like this?
the cost is the cost of the nomination preparation, and I can't tell you what the bid might be. I'd say somewhere $10,000 to $12,000 is probably an average. Some districts are far more expensive. Some are a little bit less. It really depends on who bids on it. We have a list of consultants who have successfully completed these types of projects in the past.
This is sort of pretty new to me, so but it seems like something we've been talking about a lot as a board for years, exploring. So thank you for the presentation. What are some of the typical? You talked about people objecting. What are some of the typical objections or pushbacks against the process?
I think some of it is misunderstanding about what this means, thinking that this is going to impose another level of reviews. But again, let's say you have a downtown listed district and you got your local permit for whatever you wanted to do. You're not interested in the tax credits. We would never see that project. We'd only see it if, again, there are any state or federal funds licenses or permits involved. So the tax credit we do review because you're getting a huge public benefit, but that's an owner's choice to do something like that. So that's typically, there's also, the reason I also talked about local landmarks is that there is some confusion about the distinction between local landmarking, which is tied specifically to the reviews and require reviews for any building permits, but this does not. So again, there's a little bit sometimes about the confusion about those two. I can tell you some people just
don't like change.
Don't like it. So, but I think what happens is we go to a lot of these informational meetings and people listen to the presentation and they go, oh, okay, I get it. It's just education primarily for people.
And one more question.
Sure.
You mentioned that there's 6 historic districts in Washington County. Which districts are those?
I'd have to pull them up for you, but I was just looking at, I can tell you what's listed if I still have this on here, what's listed in your community. I can also pull up Washington County. So actually.
And so this same program would be available in those districts?
It's available, yeah. So the only other listed district in the city is the Barton Historic District and sort of a small district, the St. Agnes Convent and School. But within the city of West Bend, listed properties include the West Bend Post Office, Lizard Mound County Park for its archaeological site, the Leander Frisbee House, the Depot, Gatto's Mill, Barton Elementary School, the Washington County Courthouse and Jail, the Barton Historic District, Amity Leather, and St. Agnes. And I can also pull up, maybe later I can pull up all of the Washington County districts, but it was just a quick look at the numbers that there are 6 in West Bend, in Washington County.
I'm not aware of any issues so far. That's all I was going to say about that.
So again, it really comes down to, are the local property owners interested in something like this? Is the community interested in supporting something like this, the cost of it? And then are the building owners interested in the program?
Just one other question. Is interior as well as exterior work covered under the tax credits?
Yes. So the tax credit for, there are 2 different tax credits in the state of Wisconsin. We have a homeowner's credit for properties that are eligible or listed in the state register or national register, and that's for income, non-income producing residential. That really covers the outside and the systems. But the 2 tax credits, the state and federal tax credits for income producing buildings, covers almost everything that you might do with the building other than removable equipment or site work. So it won't cover, if you have a restaurant, it won't cover your new appliances, but it would cover the build out. But again, all of that would be reviewed and have to make sure that it meets the standards. But we have huge tax credit projects like schools being converted to apartments. It's actually turning those classrooms into apartments that qualifies for the tax credits. So yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
And does there, I know this may be a weird question, but does there have to be like photography or something that shows what the...
Yep, so
Okay.
when you turn in the project, so at the theater, for example, that was a larger project. So we have 2 architects on our staff, and typically, unless it's a very straightforward, like let's say you want to do a storefront, the architects will actually come out and meet with you before you submit your project. The Park Service does require that you record the existing conditions because when you submit that last part, the part 3, you also need to submit photographs and actually show that you did what you said you were going to do. So there is a photo documentation of recording that.
Anything else?
Yeah, do you have to have a majority, or does everybody have to agree to it? Because not everybody in the downtown would have a historic building.
Right, so anybody who is in the boundary, whether they're a contributing or a non-contributing building, would be sent the objection form. And again, a majority of the property owners would have to actively object with a notarized form for it not to be listed. So it's not necessarily a one-to-one. Some buildings have 3 owners, 4 owners. Some people own 5 buildings. And it doesn't matter how many buildings you own, you get 1 objection.
So is the process it would be like maybe on the bid's responsibility to send out notification that this is something that we're going to do, and you would have like X amount of time to say yay or nay. And if the majority of people said yay, then you as a building owner, if you didn't want it, would kind of lose out on that?
No, so you can't opt out. It's the whole district or not. So that's the thing about districts. Districts are about that collection and how they work together. That's why we think it's a really great idea to have these meetings very early on with all of the owners in a district, because it gives you a sense of people, are they going to support it? I can tell you it's usually people who show up to the meetings are the people who really care and the people who are against it, and most people are sort of like, It's okay. But that's why you want to have that informational meeting at the beginning so that you can get a real sense of whether it would be something that would be worth supporting. Again, depending on, if the city were paying for this, you would have to devise your own method of establishing whether there is interest in this and having, for example, the bid district pay for the nomination. So again, we always try to do things to make sure that we will end up with a positive result. So by having informational meetings, by doing the assessments on these historic districts and making sure that there is something that is listable there. And we also, as an office, don't recommend going forward unless we feel that this is a good candidate for listing, just in terms of meeting the National Register requirements.
And I just want to make sure that I sort of understand this a little bit. So I just want to, so the pros to this seem like obviously the title of being a historic district from a marketing standpoint, branding standpoint. Obviously there's a lot of good that comes with that. The tax credit obviously makes sense, but I just want to make sure the tax credit incentivizes future rehab, restoration, things like that. But there's no real benefit to the existing businesses outside of them doing work on their buildings, correct?
Right, there's no, if you're asking if there's some sort of economic grant or something,
Sure,
we don't
incentive
administer anything like that.
But it incentivizes future
investment in the district.
Right.
So, and again, the thing about a district which is advantageous is that the theater was found to meet the criteria for listing on its own. So just like those buildings and places I showed you ahead of time as an individual listing. But the vast majority of buildings in the district don't have that level of importance. And so the only way that they would qualify is by being part of a historic district. And that's the advantage of historic districts, is that they bring in many, many more properties and qualify them for the credits than trying to do this, maybe the 1, 2, or 3 buildings in the downtown that might be individually eligible.
Sure. So there's really no downside because you can opt, there's no additional red tape. Okay, yeah, I think I got it.
So again, we have a frequently asked questions sheet on our website, so you can always look at that, can share that with people. Again, the best way is to talk to people in the community and really get a sense if this is something that people are interested in, and before going forward.
And I assume you wouldn't be here if you didn't think this was a good candidate.
Right.
Not considering with the objection and all
Yes.
that. Right, yeah.
Right. So I was asked to come some very cold winter day. When was that? And we walked up and down the historic core and looked at the buildings. And that's part of what I do in my job, is I go to communities and by their invitation to see if they might have a historic district and say, yep, this is what holds together and this is where I think the boundaries would be. And again, as part of the research for the nomination, what they do is they look at building records and permits and Sanborn historic maps and really get a lot more history. And sometimes the boundary shifts a little bit. Usually it's pretty accurate to where it is. And then we also then make the final decisions about what is a contributing and a non-contributing building as we learn more about what changes have been made and when they were made to buildings.
Just one other question.
Sure.
This only is in regard to architectural buildings. It doesn't have anything to do with, let's say, the original type of lamp poles or something, that if you wanted to go back in, if the district wanted to replace those with something more historical than
So
what
that
they
would be, when we see things like that, is usually like a DOT project, or if you applied, we would then because it's a unit of government action, depending on whether it has the potential for impact, we might comment on it. We can also give you suggestions on what might be done. Where we would have concern is any sort of large-scale alteration to any open areas in the district that a municipality might undertake. But again, that's usually a consultation with our office to talk about, whether that's appropriate or not appropriate, whether it has an impact, doesn't have an impact. Because what we're trying to do is to maintain the character of the district over time. So, the Department of Transportation used to have a number of enhancement grants that communities applied for, and because it was a federal grant, ultimately, we would look at those and comment on them.
Thank you.
The thing where we do comment, I guess most of the time for downtowns is DOT projects. We get a lot of comments on those.
So my understanding, because we've kind of had this conversation previous, is it would go to the council just to get their blessings if we wanted to do this. But when we talked to the mayor, his suggestion is to let the bid see this first, make sure the bid was on board, and then if we decided we wanted to do it, we could proceed. So I guess my suggestion at this point is everybody has seen it, just kind of take some time, digest it, and then we maybe talk about it at another meeting and just decide, where do we want to see this, and do we want to see it, and then how do we proceed? Would be my suggestion. I mean, I don't know what anybody else thinks.
Have you, did you make this meeting available? I mean, I know
This meeting was made, the reason we did it tonight was to open it up to the public.
Okay, and the rest of the business owners, okay.
And, here's.
Is this the kind of
what we
attendance
yeah.
you get when you do that in general?
Yes,
okay. I don't mean to be sarcastic, but
yeah.
Okay.
So I think if we move this forward, it may get a little more attention. But I don't know. It's.
Right, okay.
I'm sure when they get the letter that says you have to, object or not object, we probably will start hearing from people.
Yeah.
So hopefully we can get that done. The plan is to have this be the first meeting to kind of start that thought process, and we are hoping we'd have more people here, obviously.
Yeah. The recommendation is, when you have that first informational meeting is, either go around and deliver invitations or make sure that everybody who is on the tax rolls as an owner in the district receives a letter inviting them to a meeting to come and hear information about the potential historic district. And those tend to be, they get a little bit of turnout. It just really depends.
I've got one last question.
Sure.
Being designated a historic district, in your experience, does that at all open the districts up to additional grants for the, say, rehab of the district or something like that? Does it?
It can help. There's a new grant program that the National Park Service has, actually for small communities for community improvement, and having a historic property is, of course, very advantageous because that's what their interest is. So it really depends on sort of the shifting landscape of federal grants that are out there. And again, some of them lean very heavily towards historic properties, and most of them do through the National Park Service since they administer the National Register. Again, if you're applying for something, you can always put that plug in there too, that this is a National Register listed district. So what the National Register listing, in a sense, does is it says that this has been through this rigorous review process at the state office with our state board. It has gone to the National Park Service, and you are officially in this federal list of recognized properties. And so it has been vetted and it, in a sense, certified that you have a historic downtown.
So,
Yeah, I think we should talk about it at the next, at a future meeting.
So I brought, again, a whole stack of those tax credit information. I'm happy to leave those if that's something that you would like to share with property owners. If we were to come to another meeting, we would bring that, because I think that's very helpful for people to see kind of what the tax credit benefits are. And again, our office would be happy to come back for a meeting to talk to property owners at a later date.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Jay, you want to?
Guess I was just looking to concur with Mike regarding our previous conversation that we had with the mayor regarding this process. And starting here made sense to us. If the bid wasn't going to be supportive of it, I don't think the council would have been too receptive. So assuming that you put this on a future bid board agenda under discussion and make recommendation to city council, I think that might make some sense. And then we talked just a few minutes about the possibility of funding the application and how that might go down. And again, we briefly talked about it, but we did talk about a 50-50 kind of a funding source between the bid and the city and working that out in some form or fashion. So I'll try to answer any questions if you have them at this time, but I think this was a great introduction. Thanks, Dyna, for coming. And
Well, and I guess the question I'd have is there any downside of us pushing this forward to the council right now? I mean, we give it to them, let them say yay or nay, and then
I suppose if it
well, I
fails,
mean,
it
we're not committed at anything.
yeah, if it were to fail, it wouldn't matter anyways, yeah. Right.
I have no problem with that at all. Okay, someone make a motion, let's make it happen.
I make a motion, we bring this to the common council.
Have a motion and a second, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, there you go, Jay.
yeah, that sounds good. So I assume that motion was with the recommendation to support the creation of, or further exploration of.
It
Right.
was a very vague motion, sorry, Jay, yes.
Well,
We're leaving it vague.
So.
We're moving it up to you guys to figure out what to do next.
So process-wise, I think bringing it to a council agenda is fine to let them know this took place and that the bid board is supportive of. Mark would remind me that it also needs to go to Plan Commission at some point through the process. So it's fine to bounce it off council and have them direct staff to continue to move this on as well through the city process. So,
Yeah,
thanks.
Okay. Next item is to have a brief conversation about next year's budget and the operating plan. We have to have everything to the council for the first week in November, I believe. So we just want to start a conversation of things that should go into the operating plan, if there's anything different than what we presently have been doing. Do you have anything that you want to say to that?
I don't have anything specific. You'll be looking at a similar budget, so around 107,000. Keeping conversations like this that you've had over the year in mind about what your goals are for the future, and yeah, I'll let you guys take it from there. And just remember how it went last year. So
I think we should also dig out that strategic plan that we did for nothing else for justice, so he has some of that history. Because that was kind of a guiding document as to where we wanted to go in 5 years. And that's, I think, a year or 2 years old. So,
it would be over 2 years old.
okay. So we should dig that out just so that we have that kind of as a guidepost.
I'd like to see it too, just because I'm curious to see what we did or didn't do off of it. Yeah. See how smart we were back then or not so smart.
I don't honestly remember what's in it.
Just a question. what's our obligation or our commitment to the Riverwalk? I mean, is that, we had 35 in this year?
So that money was put in there really at the request of Jay of if they needed money this year, we put it in. We're not obligated to spend that.
That was probably a bad term, but I mean, you know, our commitment to the Riverwalk.
We haven't made
don't-
we haven't made any commitment. That was just kind of there if they needed something, so we had something in a budget. So that could technically go into the fund that we have created to either do the Main Street or do the Riverwalk in the future. Or we could put it towards something else if we felt it was, you know, if we hear from David Frank about Christmas decorations that we think makes sense, we can move that however we want. The one thing about the operating budget is unless we've really committed to something, we can kind of move that around. It's more of a kind of a vague document to give to council that says, here's our direction, this is where we're going with the money, and our intent, so that we don't have to continually go to them for approval to spend it. So we could move that into something else, or we could leave it into the future fund as well.
Good. Thank you.
Okay.
I can run through the timeline with you really quick then. So this is us kicking it off here in September, your September meeting. It'll be a open forum meeting, so there'll be save the date cards for everybody in the bid, and then you'll get the draft in your September meeting like you did last year and the years before that. You'll discuss the draft, and then you can wait till October and then approve the operating plan based off of those notes from the month before. Then we'll send a public notice to bid members in October for also for the agenda, the bid board agenda then. Then we'll try to get on late October council so that we have early November as a backup for approval from council.
Any questions? Okay. The only thing I would say is we've tried to do that public meeting at night, and we see what happens. I say we stay with our normal time in October and not move it to a night meeting, because it doesn't matter. Would be my recommendation.
Okay.
So if there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks, everybody, for coming tonight.